Hi, I'm back here talking to you about TV technologies. This lecture is about how a signal gets from its place of originality, its place of where it came from, its place of origin, to its destination, which is your home. Now, I know a lot of you have maybe cable, or you'll have a fiber optic line, or some of you have a dish network or some kind of satellite dish that allows you to receive your signals. But the point is, there's a bunch of different ways that the signal gets to your house, and we're going to discuss that in this next part here. Well, actually, this lecture is broken into 8 parts, so I'll do one part at a time, and this way you could stop and start up again to review each part as you go along. The first thing is satellites, okay? Or actually, before I even get to that point, there's a group of words on this page and on the next page, and you need to know what these words mean in order to understand the next 8 parts. So I wrote the words out, I'll say them, but at the same time you're going to have to write them out in your notes and write out the definition because I don't have enough space here to do that. So the first thing is Earth station. Earth station is where the signal originates from. An Earth station could be like the ABC Broadcast Center, or it could be a CBS Broadcast Center. It's where the programming is coming from. So Earth station, where the program originates from. The next thing is an uplink and downlink. An uplink is where the signal is beamed to the satellite. It could also come from the satellite and go back down to Earth, which is called the downlink. Those are huge towers that transmit the signal and then receive the signal. And I have a diagram I'll show you as we move along. The next thing is satellite, which I said before, satellite technology. Satellite orbits the Earth in what's called a geosynchronous orbit. Some people call it a geostationary orbit. The idea behind that is the satellite has to keep up with the Earth's rotation. So as the Earth is spinning on its axis, the satellite has to move fast enough to be at the same place in the sky at all times. It's called a geosynchronous orbit or a geostationary orbit. Okay, that's a satellite. And I'll talk about satellites in a little bit. I also did geosynchronous. In line of sight. This other word, in line of sight, means your home antenna, whether it be on your TV top or outside your window or whatever. Your home antenna must be somewhat visible from the downlink antenna. Again, I'll go over that with a diagram. And then after that, we have what's known as a translator. A translator is something that gathers up the signal that's gotten weak, strengthens the signal, and then makes it travel another great distance. This is all in line of sight. Okay? If something is not in line of sight, it means something is obstructing the signal. For example, the other side of a mountain or through a thick forest or brush. That's not in line of sight. In line of sight is a visible line from one point to another point. That's what we mean about in line of sight. Now let's go to the diagram. I drew this diagram, which I usually draw in the classroom on a big whiteboard, so I'm hoping this shows up on your screen. A circle right here, which represents the Earth. I wrote Earth on top of that. And over here, the Earth station. Of course, this stuff happens on the Earth, but I couldn't draw it on the Earth. It would be too small, so I drew it outside of the globe. So this Earth station, which would be your ABC Broadcast Center or your CBS Broadcast Center, wherever the program is originating from is your Earth station. That gets wired to your uplink tower. The job of your uplink tower is to beam the signal to the satellite. It's in a geosynchronous orbit. The satellite is 22,300 miles above the Earth's equator. 22,300 miles above the Earth's equator. That's called in a geosynchronous orbit. Okay? And then the signal gets beamed down from the satellite to a downlink antenna, and that antenna is beaming it to various homes in this area. I skip down here at the bottom of the page. From here, I'm going down here, the downlink antenna, and I'm showing you this line, in line of sight, and these little house-like figures with little crosses on top are the antennas receiving the signal. Then this may go 50 miles or 100 miles or whatever, and then the signal starts to get weak, and then it gets picked up by this translating tower. Once the signal gets picked up by the translating tower then strengthens the signal so it could go another 50 or 100 or whatever miles to reach more homes. And that's the goal of the translating tower. So let's get back to the satellite. The satellite technology has been around since the 1950s. NASA launches the satellites. Corporations pay to have the satellites put up, to orbit the Earth. And on the satellite, there are channels. Okay, These channels are receivers and senders of programming, both audio and video programming. On a communication satellite, there are 24 transponders on a communication satellite. That communication satellite is orbiting the Earth in a geosynchronous orbit 22,300 miles above the Earth's equator. Okay. Next page. The problem, of course, since this has been around since the 1950s, it's not the most perfect system. There are people that do not receive television at all. And all the other technologies we're going to be talking about is to offset those disadvantages. But before we get to that, let's go to the next part. The other words are on the next page. The other words, the word broadcast and the word narrowcast. Broadcast simply means, for the purpose of this lecture, is transmitting a signal from one person or from one place to as many areas as possible for free. So in other words, you can put an antenna on your TV top and you could tune in your television and you could receive Channel 2, CBS, Channel 4, NBC, again in New York, Channel 5, Fox in New York, Channel 7, ABC in New York, Channel 9, WOR coming out of Secaucus, New Jersey, but in New York, and then Channel 11, WPIX in New York, and a few other stations, Channel 21, 22, 41, 47, 68. And that's broadcasting one signal to as many people as possible for free. Now, I put narrowcasting right underneath that because the way of remembering narrowcasting would be one signal to as many people as possible for a fee. In other words, you have to pay for that signal. This is like what we've come to today when a lot of us have cable TV in our homes or satellite dish network bringing television to our homes or a fiber optic cable bringing television to our homes. That's narrowcasting. We are paying those people money so they can wire our homes and send us the signals. So they know exactly who we are by the type of programming package we view. Do we have sports packages? Do we have extended movie packages? Do we have basic viewing packages? They know that. And what they do with that information is they usually sell that information to researchers or to advertising entities that are looking to advertise products to us. The next thing I wanted to talk about real quick is footprint. A footprint represents signal coverage. Actually, there are two definitions for footprint. One is signal coverage. How far can the signal cover? Okay. So for example, my voice could really only cover this room I'm in. If you were outside of this room, you wouldn't hear my voice. So the footprint of my voice is basically this room. If we were to put a microphone here and a PA system outside this room, amplifying my voice, well then the footprint of my voice would be extended to outside this room. That's one definition for footprint. So it's the signal coverage, okay, is a footprint. The other definition of a footprint is a geographical place on Earth that you could put a tower. Now you can't really put these towers anywhere because they're gigantic. They're they're heavy and they'll sink into the Earth. And even though you think the Earth is solid, well, it's not as solid as it is in other places. Case in point, look at the Leaning Tower of Pisa. I like to bring this up in class all the time. The Leaning Tower of Pisa is leaning. Why is it leaning? Well, because when they built that many years ago, they didn't have the technology to understand how solid the Earth was, or not, several feet down below the Earth. I'm talking about 50, 60, 70, 100 feet, 200 feet, 300 feet. So in some parts, what's going on is there's more sand than clay. Other parts, there's more rock than sand. And so that's what happens with the Leaning Tower of Pisa. It's leaning on the side that the soil is much more, it's not as thick, it's not as stationary as the soil on the other side of the tower. And so it's leaning into the ground. Leaning Tower of Pisa, great example for a footprint. So a geographical place on Earth that could sustain the weight of a tower. If you look at Manhattan from New Jersey or from Queens, you'll notice there's a bunch of tall buildings. Okay, and then there's a bunch of lower buildings, and there's a bunch of tall buildings again as you get to the lower parts of Manhattan. That's because the footprint in the lower part of Manhattan is very sustainable to handle the weight of those big buildings. And that's why we put the towers, the transmitting towers, on top of those buildings so it could get the greatest coverage possible. Again, next time you're driving down the FDR Drive, or you're driving in Queens looking at Manhattan or the West Side Highway, or you're in Jersey, I should say, look at West Side Highway doesn't work because you're in Manhattan. Look, you're in Jersey driving down the shore there, and you could see Manhattan. Look at the skyline, and you see there's a bunch of tall buildings clustered together around the 40s and 30s, and then it goes down, and there's no more tall buildings. Respectively, they're tall, they're 12, 15, maybe 20 stories, but they're not 80 stories tall. That's what I'm talking about. And then it gets down to lower Manhattan, where the Freedom Tower is. There's 80-story plus buildings. And the reason for that being is the ground, the earth, can hold a building of that size and that weight. That's the other definition of footprint. Okay? Let's talk a little bit about scrambling, coaxial cable, and head end and hubs. When we get to scrambling and coaxial cable and hubs, I'm talking about a cable system. Now, a cable system originally was developed to bring people that were not in line of sight, that did not receive the free program like I talked about on the other program, on the other page, in broadcasting. Broadcasting one signal to as many people as possible for free, right? But there were people in the country that were not in line of sight. At the same time, they're paying into the system with their tax dollars to launch satellites, for the world, for the United States at least. And they're not getting television. And so the point was made that people, Americans in the United States, no matter where you are, need to receive basic information related to your safety. Is there going to be a storm? Is there going to be an earthquake? Well, you really don't know if there's going to be an earthquake, but if there is an earthquake, where do you go to get help? How about that one? If you're by a railroad track and there's a toxic chemical spill, where do you go to get help? So this is something that, the argument was made successfully that we need to bring television of some kind into everyone's homes, in the United States. And so that's the real purpose of cable television. I'm going to write cable television on the book, on the background here. Cable television would use a satellite system. It would take the signal from the last downlink, wire it to something called a head end. Head end is like a master area, master control area that's got all these wires coming into it. And then from there, it would wire out to various locations. We'll call these hubs, okay? H-U-B-S. We'll call these hubs. Okay, that could be the Bronx. If you're, again, we're in New York, that could be Staten Island, that could be Queens. We'll do another one that's Manhattan, etc. And this cable they're using is called coaxial cable. That was on the other page. Coaxial cable. I'll go right here to you. Coaxial cable. Coaxial cable is the cable that plugs into the back of your TV set. Not the electrical cable, the other cable that comes from the wall outlet. It's a round cable with a pin in the middle. And the single, that's not electrical cable, it's coaxial cable. And what's interesting about coaxial cable, it's the outside of the cable is usually a color, black or something like that. That's like a rubber shield or coating. And then inside there's some wire, silver wire that acts as a shield. And then inside of that we have a plastic center. Okay, and then inside the plastic center we have a copper core. The copper core is where that signal is transmitted. And the reason why they use copper, because copper is a really good conductor of this video signal, audio signal as well. But the more pure the alloy, the more pure the signal. So for example, if that were gold, it would work even better. But let's face it, we can't put gold in the street, otherwise people would dig up the cable and sell it, right? But there's millions and millions of miles of cable running under the streets of New York, Bronx, Manhattan, Staten Island, Queens, Brooklyn. And so copper is the center of that cable. And that's the coaxial cable, which also comes out of your wall or comes out of from an antenna or from inside your building, from the window. And that coaxial cable screws into the back of your TV set where it says antenna. Okay? That's a coaxial cable. And there's arguments made. In the beginning, when we first moved to this system in modern times for alternative programming, the signal was very pure and very clean. But then as more and more people started to order up the system to purchase this, began to get deteriorated. It began to uh, you know, by splitting the signal many times, it gets weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker and weaker. So that's what's, you know. But now we're onto the digital realm. That's changed again. It's much better. So let's getting back to coaxial cable. So I want to go to cable. I was on the cable page. There we go. So back to the cable page. So you have your satellite, which is way up there, beaming a signal down to a downlink, okay? The downlink then it gets wired using coaxial cable to a head end. A head end is a master control area, which then sends wires out to various boroughs or locations, okay? And then from there it comes into your building from, you know, the sewer or from the manhole down in the basement of your building and comes up to all the apartments. Or if you live in a more residential type area, suburban type area, it comes into your home off the telephone pole. It gets wired right into your home. The point is, cable TV originally was made to bring people in line of sight programming that were not in line of sight. Okay. What we use cable TV for in more modern times is alternative programming. Alternative, you say? Alternative to what? Alternative to standard broadcast television. The channel CBS News, CBS, ABC, NBC, Fox, WOR, WPIX. That's standard free broadcasting television. I can go out to the store, buy a TV set, plug it into the wall, plug in an antenna on the back of that TV, and put up rabbit ears, you know, little antenna, and move the rabbit ears until I receive a signal that's floating in the airwaves, that's coming from those broadcast centers. But again, in more modern times, we use this cable technology, this system, to bring people alternative programming, and that is alternative to broadcasting. Okay, so people pay a little more money. They pay money to get the free stuff, but at the same time they pay money to get the extra stuff. The specialty, the movie channels, the music channels, the news channels, the cooking channels, the sports channels, the hobby channels, you name it, there's a channel out there for it. They're really very nice, interesting. Okay, so that's where we are here. So that's the part two, actually. Cable is part two. The next thing is part three. Part three is something called subscription television. Subscription television, this is another thing around the 1980s, which was a service to try to bring people channels that weren't getting the specialty channels, you know, that I just talked about. You know, in the 1980s, when cable television was bringing people specialty programming, alternative programming to broadcasting, there were still some areas that were not receiving this system. And so there were other companies that popped up called subscription TV. This will be part three, subscription TV, okay? And subscription TV uses a few things. It uses a special antenna. Okay, you need a decoder box because it scrambles its signal. You can't get the signal unless you pay for it. And they send you a box, a decoder box, to unscramble the signal, and then you pay a monthly fee. You pay a monthly fee in order to pay for the service. So subscription TV, again, this was very popular in the 1980s when cable television was breaking its way into major markets, bringing major markets alternative style television, alternative to standard broadcasting. And of course, look what that does. It really prevents a lot of issues with people putting antennas on their rooftops. Because if you have a building that's got maybe 50 apartments in it, and then each apartment may have 1 or 2 television sets, and then you run a wire out the window up to the top of the building to the antenna, you know, and then you got to put the antenna into the rooftop. You're poking a hole in the roof. It's causing water to gather, which is a health hazard because of pigeons and disease and all that. And then the other thing is, it's also a fire hazard. If God forbid there's a fire in your building or where you are, the firemen can't get over there because they're tripping over cables and antennas because there's so many of them on the rooftop. So I remember this. I lived through this. I saw this. I saw when there were so many antennas on rooftops of apartment buildings. And then when cable television started to happen in the 1980s, there were much less antennas and a much cleaner look. But again, just because cable television was happening to bring alternative programming into people in the 1980s, there were still people that didn't receive it. And that's what subscription TV does. You had a special antenna, a microwave dish, which someone from the company would come to your house and go on the rooftop and see if they had a in-line of sight view of the downlink that's sending that signal, whatever channel you were ordering up. And if they did, they'd direct a special antenna in that direction. And then they run a wire down the front of the building and then down into your window and hook it up to a decoder box, which has a scrambler or a descrambler on it. You tune your TV set to a certain channel, for channel 3 or channel 4, and then you switch on that special decoder box, and you would see the free channel, not the free channels, but the special subscription television channels that were coming into your house. And you adjusted it like a tuner to get them really clear. And then you paid a monthly fee to get that. And that was only for 1 or 2 or 3 channels. I mean, today, you know, you got cable television, you got hundreds of channels, you pay money for that every month. But in addition to that, they bring you your internet service and your telephone service. But that's where we are today in 2020. So subscription television, special antenna, decoder box, monthly fee. Something else, part 4, we call satellite master antenna system. Big word, very simple concept. Same thing, let's go 4, Roman numeral 4, would be satellite master antenna system. Okay, what we got there is we have a building or a complex, an apartment building or a complex, which has a gigantic dish mounted on its rooftop. Or maybe it's got a lot of property off to the side of the building. Gigantic dish. You've seen these, you still see these if you drive in upstate New York. You'll still see a lot of these, you know, where they have a lot of farmland. And what it does is that satellite dish is taking the signal directly from the satellite. Or you know, so you got your satellite orbiting the Earth, okay? And then that's your home, or next to your home has a gigantic satellite dish, you know, which is receiving that signal, okay? In other words, you're becoming now the downlink. It doesn't have to go to a downlink, and then from a downlink it gets sent, you know, in line of sight to various directions, and hopefully your home antenna is visible to that downlink. So what happens there is you become the downlink. And this is really very popular, or was again very popular in the 1980s, because it cleaned up the roof line, removed a lot of antennas from the rooftops, and at the same time removed the health hazard and also the fire hazard, and was able to, each person in the apartment was able to receive signals coming off the satellite dish, which is again a cool thing. Like I said, if you drive upstate New York, which I've done, I've seen a lot of these private homes which have huge lots of land next to them. They still may have some of these gigantic satellite dishes there, and they're able to move the satellite dish with a motorized control from their couch to move the satellite dish to read another satellite. Because remember, there's many satellites orbiting the Earth. I'm just talking about communication satellites. There are weather satellites. There are communication satellites for television and telephones. There are military satellites, surveillance satellites, all sorts of things going on up there. But so this is, the satellite dish is able to move and able to receive programming from different satellites. So for example, if you are from Europe and you live in the United States and you want to watch sporting events from Europe live, you would have to subscribe to a certain company or a certain feed that would send you the programming to this dish, or you have to move this dish to a certain angle which was aimed at that special satellite, you know, that's sending that type of programming. Satellite master antenna system. Okay. Next, part 5. It starts to move. This is an 8-part lecture. So part 5 is talk about direct dish satellite, or DDS, direct dish. Looks like a dentist, DDS. Or no, direct dish satellite. What that is this. We're moving now on to into the 1990s, and the technology is getting much better, and the satellite dishes are much smaller. They're about I'd say about maybe that big, which I'm holding my hands about, maybe 2 feet, 2.5 feet by 2.5 feet. And you see these now when you drive through towns and suburban areas. They have these dishes nailed to their rooftop. And you might see more than one dish. You'll see, and they're aimed at different directions. And that's because they're looking at different satellites. They're receiving signals from different parts of the world. Now, getting back to my footprint definition, I said a footprint is signal coverage. Well, theoretically, 3 satellites could cover the whole Earth. 3 satellites. You could beam a signal from here up to one satellite, beam it from one satellite to another satellite to another satellite, then down to Australia with 3 satellites. Theoretically, 3 satellites covers the Earth, but there were many more satellites up there. So in the 1990s, when the technology got even better, these companies came out with these smaller satellite dishes, which allowed you personally to become the downlink, the receiver. And the same thing, so you had a special antenna. And then you had a tuning box, a tuner to tune the channel, and you paid a monthly fee. And people are still doing this today because it's so very convenient. The next step, though, beyond this, this is part 5, part 6, is something, again, going back to the 1980s, something called multi-point distribution service. Multi-point distribution service. That's when a company or a corporation, buys satellite time, and they transmit information from one location to another location. It was the beginnings of teleconferencing, video conferencing, when there was a big corporation that has offices in different parts of the company or different parts of the world, for that matter, and it's much more cost effective to talk to someone that's on the other side of the globe this way than sending a crew of people over there. You have plane fare you have to pay for, you have hotel fees, food, and any extracurricular activities you need to pay for to send your employees over there. Wasn't a good idea. I mean, it was a good idea at first, but it just cost too much money. Multi-point distribution service uses special frequencies, and it's more like a point-to-point communication. Point-to-point. No one else can receive these signals, only the people that the signals are aimed for. And how they do that is they use certain frequencies. They use like a very high frequency, 2162 gigahertz. That's a very high frequency. Take into consideration, our regular television goes from 45 to 890 megahertz. Okay, that's a much lower frequency. In other words, your TV sees 45 to 890 megahertz. But this 2162 gigahertz is a much higher, larger number, a much higher frequency. So your TV won't even work, won't even recognize these signals. So again, you have a special antenna for this setup, special antenna. You need a down converter. That down converter converts the 2162 gigahertz down to something between 450 and 890 megahertz. So your TV, you'll see it. And then, of course, you're paying a fee because you're using the service. But that was how video conferencing, teleconferencing was done many, many years ago, again in the 1980s. Which you could look at today as something comparable to that, or somewhat, maybe not comparable, but something like it. You use Skype. When you want to Skype somebody, you go on your computer and you could get a video feed, and you could look at somebody somewhere else in the world, and you could have a conversation with a relative in another continent or in another state. Apple does FaceTime, right? They have this, or is that Facebook? I forget which one it is, but Apple has their own way of doing it, Macintosh, Apple, and Facebook has a way of doing it now because they're using broadband signals, which I'll get to in the next, not this part, the next part, broadband. That's part 8. So multi-point distribution service is point-to-point communication. It uses special frequencies, so only the people set up to receive those frequencies will receive those frequencies. So you need a special antenna to receive those frequencies. You need a down converter to convert those high frequencies to regular frequencies so your TV, a regular television set, can recognize those frequencies. And of course, you pay a fee. Okay, you pay a fee. That's multi-point distribution service. Again, that was very popular for corporations and companies in the 1980s and 90s. And then as we moved on into the later 90s, we started to use the internet. But I'll get to the internet in part 8. Right now we're going to part 7. Okay, let's go to part 7. Part 7 is low power television. 7. Low power TV. Low power TV is for very rural areas, areas that are in a location that you can't run cables there, you can't get antennas there, and so you have to figure out a way of getting a signal there. Okay. They're all over the country, but they're being replaced again by the dish network thing I described earlier, and also broadband, which I'll describe in a few minutes. But low power TV, for example, let's say you have a downlink antenna receiving signals from a satellite, and then you have this town that lives down in this great valley. Okay, now in this valley you'll have an earth station, you have another tower that'll transmit signals in line of sight in a 15 to 25 mile area. Okay, only cover 15 to 25 miles, and all these homes that have their antennas up, then standard antennas that you would buy at an electronics store or you would buy online, will be set up to receive these signals, because these signals are conventional signals, 45, to 850 megahertz. 45 or 49, so sometimes I forget. It's not going to be a test question, so don't worry about it. What you really need to know is, you really need to know that there are different frequencies. That's the important thing. So low power TV is using conventional frequencies to transmit its signal. It takes a signal from the outside world, from their last downlink, either by a wire or a system of multi-point beamings from different antennas, gets that signal down to an earth station, and then from there erects a tower and then sends the signal in that location, the 15 to 25 mile area. That was a big operation. And who financed this were basically networks. Networks financed the towns with the equipment, thinking that, well, it's small town programming, I guess they might produce something that basically we own, and therefore we could sell it to another small town somewhere else in the country. But the only original programming the small towns made were programming that was related directly to the small town. For example, like when garbage collection is going to happen, when the streets are going to be closed for certain functions, or and any other activity, advertisements for the local drugstore or dry cleaning shop, which had nothing to do with any other town. It only had to do with this town. And so there were various towns doing this. But you see, the signal range is only 15 to 25 mile area, so it doesn't interfere. That's the idea. It doesn't interfere with the other towns. Now, around this time, this is again something, let's go back to the late 1980s, around this time there were like 14,000 of these in the United States, and like around 1,200 of them were in Alaska, to give you an idea of the type of terrain we're talking about when we're dealing with a low power TV setup. Alaska, you can't run wires into the ground because it freezes, and then the ice moves, and then it breaks the cables. You can't erect towers anywhere because, again, the ground is not stable. It moves, it thaws out, and it was summertime, and it gets hard again in the wintertime. And so you had to do it periodically or piecemeal to get the signal into the town. So you take the signal from the downlink into the town, wire it into the town using coaxial cable, right? You know what coaxial cable is. And then from there you add an earth station, and then from there it gets wired to an uplink of some kind to transmit in a 15 to 25 mile area in line of sight the programming that's coming out of this earth station. In addition, this earth station is taking some other programming off the downlink coming off the satellite, if they can get it, because it's in a bad area. So that's low power TV. It's also known as community television. That's another way of thinking about it. Okay. But what's replacing this, I told you before, what's replacing this is this dish network, where you're nailing a small dish that's about 2 feet wide to your rooftop and aiming it at the satellite that you're trying to receive programming from. You pay the company a fee, and then you have a tuning box inside your house hooked up to your television set with coaxial cable with a remote control, and you flip through a series of channels. Okay, that's the other system. So you're saying, this is crazy, and this is all these different technologies, and this is how it got. But this was because the original technology, satellite technology, was not perfect. Okay, the Earth is round, and so the signal is going to get lost You know, the Earth is not a flat plane where you could send a signal and it's going to continue on straight unless it hits something and stops. If the Earth, even if it doesn't hit anything, the signal is eventually going to drift off into space because the Earth is round. So, which brings us to part 8, which is the last part. I guess you're probably happy about that. The last part is broadband, which is what we're doing today. And you're experiencing that now because I see you all the time in the classroom with your phones, watching programming and sending signals and making telephone calls, texting, sending emails and everything. This is broadband. So let's look at part 8, which is broadband technology. We're into the 2020s. Here we go. Broadband. And at this point right now in 2020, broadband is in its infantile stage. It hasn't really developed yet, but it's on its way. Things are happening all the time. It's exciting to see and watch how things happen. What happens is you specifically, your phone, you are the downlink. Okay. You can make a telephone call to anywhere in the world. You can call Europe, you can call China, you can call Australia, you can call Russia, you can call, the Netherlands. It costs you some money, extra money, but and in some cases it won't if you have a package that covers those types of calls. But the point is, wherever you are with that phone in your hand, whether it be on the road, don't talk on the phone while you're driving. Will it be on the road as a passenger in the car, or in your study hall, or in your parents' house, or in the basement, or on the rooftop, or at the beach? As long as there's a cellular connection, okay, a cellular connection, that would use a satellite system to take your phone call anywhere in the world you want to go. Also, it would allow you to surf the internet from anywhere in the world. Right? It would allow you to text people. It would allow you to watch videos or watch television programming from any place in the world. As long as there's a cellular tower. The way cell phones use cellular towers to bounce the signal from one tower to another to maintain your phone call, I know that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you get dropped, but to maintain your phone, that technology of bouncing one signal from one tower to another tower to another tower, as you travel, it's the same technology you would use to take that signal up to a satellite, because eventually it'll go from a cell tower to a satellite tower up to a satellite. And even when you watch the news today, they're using cellular service to upload their video live from a feed, live from the field. So if a reporter's doing a report, they could have a cellular uplink, okay, using cell phone systems. And then from the cell phone system could go to a satellite tower, and the satellite tower will beam it to a satellite, and the satellite will then beam it to a downlink tower somewhere else on the Earth. And then it goes backwards, and then the receiver can see those programs live. Of course, there'll be a delay, okay, because you got to go 22,300 miles up to the equator, 22,300 miles down to the Earth. So that's 22. That's 44,600 miles of travel time. So there'll be a delay in the signal, but you'll be able to at least get the signal across in a relative short amount of time. So, and your phone itself, your telephone is really quite large. I mean, the technology now has gotten to a point where you could shrink this technology down to the head of a pin. It's called nanotechnology. And you could use this information, or you could use this technology, you could implant this technology on somebody or in somebody. Dogs, sometimes they put this technology in dog collars. Sometimes they put this technology under the dog's skin, an animal's skin. So if the dog runs away, the animal gets lost, you could locate the animal using the broadband technology, using a satellite feed, using cellular service and everything like that. And people are thinking about using that technology to track other human beings, which I don't doubt in some point in our future that'll happen. I know it's you feel it's a violation. I know what you're thinking. Oh, there's a violation of my privacy. I don't want anyone to know where I am. But what about when you're an infant, or what about when you're a young child? I think your parents have a right to know where you are at all times to make sure you're not in harm's way. But there's got to be some point, I would imagine, that you were allowed to remove that technology from wherever it is in your body. Nanotechnology is very interesting to look into. I would suggest you go online and do a Google search of nanotechnology and see what it is. It's 1/100th the size of a blood cell. It's so very small, and it's a mini robot, a mini computer. that could be used in this fashion. And that's where we are right now in 2020, and actually we're probably further along and I don't even know about it yet, but in the coming years it's an exciting field to watch and see how it will benefit, you know, our our lifestyles. So those are the 8 parts. Broadband would be number 8. Okay, I'll do a number 8. So I'll get back to the beginning to wrap up. We'll do a quick review of what I've just done, in case you might have missed anything. So you got your Earth station, where a program originates from. You have your uplink and downlink tower beaming a signal to a satellite, and downlink tower receiving a signal from a satellite. Your satellite orbits the Earth in a geosynchronous orbit. Okay, and on a satellite there are 24 channels or 24 transponders on a satellite. They could both receive and transmit one signal. Below that, the satellite orbits the Earth in a geosynchronous orbit. That idea of geosynchronous means that it keeps up with the speed of the Earth's rotation. So the satellite is always at a fixed point in the sky. You don't have to search for it. It's always there because it's keeping up with the Earth's rotation. The next thing is in line of sight. The idea of nothing obstructing the signal from one antenna to the next antenna is in line of sight. If there's a forest or a mountain or a hilly terrain, the signal is going to be obstructed, then you're not in line of sight. If you are in line of sight, then you will receive those signals. Okay. For example, if you live in Manhattan, there are a lot of tall buildings, and it's very hard to receive regular in line of sight programming in Manhattan because the signal is bouncing all over the buildings. So a lot of those buildings, those apartment complexes, they utilize a system, a master antenna system, or a dish network system, or some sort of master system that's receiving programming signals from a satellite or from a downlink wired into each individual apartment. Translator, again, getting back to that broadcast in line of sight broadcasting, is when the signal weakens over a period of distance. That signal weakens, then that signal strengthens again, gets collected by a translating tower, the audio is amplified, the video is strengthened, is color corrected, and it travels on the greater distance. Okay? So this chart just outlines what I just talked about. Hopefully you could see it enough where you could zoom in on it with your phone to see the Earth station, the uplink tower, satellite, 24 transponders on a satellite, 22,300 miles above the Earth's equator, down to a downlink, then in line of sight to people's homes. And then from here, from people's homes, the signal travels a distance, gets collected by a translating tower, then travels a greater distance to be received by more homes. Okay. We talked about broadcasting, meaning one signal to as many people as possible for free, right? And narrowcasting is just the opposite, one signal to as many people as possible for a fee, because you're paying a company to deliver a service to your home. Yeah, which gets, some people say, well, how come they say you hear foul language on narrowcast program and you don't on broadcast? Well, in broadcasting, the Federal Communications Commission is regulating content because anybody could walk into the room and see what's going on or hear what's going on. And children may be there or people that are offended by such programming. And so that's why broadcasting is guarded that way. And the government, the Federal Communications Commission, is set up to do that. But narrowcasting is different because you're paying a company to send you signals. And so if you don't like what they're sending you, you could always delete that package and order up a different package, or delete those channels and order up different channels. But the narrowcasting, the idea here is that company knows what you're consuming, and they'll use that information to target, advertise you. Okay. The other thing was footprint. It had 2 definitions: a geographical place on Earth that could sustain the weight of a tower, an uplink tower, a downlink tower, or a translating tower. And then you have a footprint is the signal coverage, how far a signal goes. Like I said, my voice goes only the distance of this room and where I'm standing. It doesn't go beyond this room because you can't hear me outside the room. So that's the other definition, is signal coverage. Okay. Scrambling is when the company scrambles the signals because they don't want you to see it unless you pay for it, and that's what you need this decoder box to do. And these companies, they use coaxial cable to send the signal into your house. Again, 1980s technology, moving all through the 1990s. They use the head end and hubs. That's again a 1980s technology, which is still being used today. Okay, the cable system. The cable system is used to bring people in line of sight that were not in line of sight, but in modern times we use it as alternative programming, alternative to standard broadcasting. Okay. And then let's go to the next page. We'll take a look at that one more time. If we could get that page going here. Be patient, please. Okay. Was part 3 subscription TV. Again, bringing people programming that were not in line of sight to those specialty channels. Okay, and especially antenna decoder by like HBO, like wireless HBO, wireless Showtime, or it used to be wireless WWHT was another channel back in the 80s. Okay, if you couldn't have the cable into your house and you didn't have the antenna, then you call this company and they'll provide a special antenna and it would wire your home with this. Satellite master antenna system was when you use one gigantic dish to service a whole apartment complex, and each apartment complex would be wired to that specific dish, and they would pay in their monthly rental fee, you know, a maintenance cost to maintain the system. Satellite master antenna system, that was part 4, and let's go on to part 5 real quick again one more time. Part 5. You got dish network, where you have the dish now is much smaller, and you can nail it to your rooftop. It has a special antenna, which is the dish, and then you need a tuner, okay, in the apartment, or I'm sorry, not the apartment, in the home, and you pay them a monthly fee. And what's beautiful about this, it's only about 2 feet wide, this dish, and you could angle it any way you like to receive programming from different satellites, but you have to pay that satellite company, you know, the fee in order to receive programming. Otherwise, their signal would be what? Would be scrambled, and you wouldn't be able to receive it. Then you have multi-point distribution service, point-to-point communication. Uses a much higher frequency, 2162 gigahertz, as opposed to 45 to 890 megahertz. 45 to 890 megahertz, which is conventional television. Okay, you need a special antenna, a down converter, because your TV cannot receive 2162 gigahertz. It only receives 45 to 890 megahertz. So you need a down converter to convert this signal to a smaller signal, so your TV can receive it. Then you can watch it, and then again you pay a monthly fee. But that's again was the beginnings of teleconferencing, video conferencing. We use different stuff today, but it still exists, I think. And then you have Lowpower TV, which is community television, which uses standard 45 to 890 megahertz. It's a 9890. And then it transmits only in a 15 to 25 mile area. So only the homes in this area will receive this signal. And it's for rural areas that's really hard to send a signal to. Okay, so you have multiple low power TV stations all over the country. Okay, and that was financed by networks. And broadband, which was part 8. Broadband is using your phone as the downlink, using your phone as receiving signals from anywhere in the world, using a series of cellular towers and downlink and uplink towers and satellite channels to receive programming right in your hands. And then I said after that, I talked about the newer technology, nanotechnology, which allows us to do this, you know, in a very, very small, undetectable way, which is a really cool, interesting technology to read about. There will be no questions about nanotechnology on an exam. Don't worry about it. But it's a good thing to look up, and because that's where we are right now. There's nanomedicine. There's all sorts of technology going on, and it's all because of computer power. The ability to shrink computer power, to smaller computers, yet are more powerful, take up less space, and do more things. That's where robotics come into play there. You know, all sorts of therapeutics to help clear out your system, your blood system, with, you know, using mini robots in your bloodstream. Don't shake your head. Look it up, and you'll see what I'm talking about. Anyway, I hope you enjoy this, and I'll be back with another lecture sometime soon.